You are listening to Practical and Woo by Mindset and Manifest. My name is Eden, and I invite you to embark on a journey with me to explore the practical and spiritual edges of the unknown for the purpose of allowing you to embody and empower yourself uniquely as you are, and to intentionally create and live a life of freedom and fulfillment. Each week, I am going to discuss topics such as energetics, reality creation, manifestation, astrology, tarot, and more to help empower you to live beyond perceived limitations and to practically design your life so it feels like absolute magic every step of the way. Let's dive in. Well, hello, brilliant soul. I have noticed a recurring theme in how we relate to growth and what we feel it should look like in both ourselves as well as in others. This distortion is in the way we look at other people when they're in the middle of something unfinished, whether it's a project or a corrected behavior or anything else, really. It also lives in the way we look at ourselves when we're not yet who we believe we are meant to be. And in this pattern, we have learned to discredit anything that's in between. We celebrate outcomes. We admire arrival. We revere what's polished and integrated and what's resolved. And all of this can fit tightly packaged into a neatly arranged and organized category. If we look to celebrity and success culture, we revere those who are fully baked in the mastery of their craft, but we rarely extend the same reverence to the process that made it possible. And more than this, we often judge the process as though it's evidenced against the person rather than evidence of their becoming. We see someone in the midst of a pattern, a mistake, or a contradiction, and we decide, whether consciously or unconsciously, that this moment is the sum total of who they are, thus collapsing their evolution into a fixed moment in time, or in other words, a fixed identity. So I want to invite us to do away with this judgment of the in-between, because this, in my opinion, is a surefire way to halt the growth of not only others, but ourselves as well. Instead, when we learn how to hold the in-between with both equal parts compassion and accountability, we create the conditions necessary for the kind of transformation that not only lasts, but bridges connection and makes the world feel even the slightest bit more kind, warm, and magical than it did before. Now, I want to be clear here. This contemplation is not advocating for bypassing responsibility, and it's not an invitation for us to need to excuse bad behavior. This episode is seeking to peel back the layers on understanding identity from the vantage point of differentiating between who someone is, who someone is becoming, and who that person is currently experiencing and expressing their life as. Because these three angles are not necessarily the same, and the failure to distinguish between them is where suffering can exist, and also where judgment often originates. I want to paint a picture for you that I believe captures this dynamic quite well. I want to invite you to imagine an artist in the midst of creating a masterpiece. The canvas is layered with early sketches, and colors have been painted over and over and over again on top of each other. There are some sections that look disjointed and some portions that don't make any sense. There are moments when the painting might even look worse than it did before. There are brush strokes that feel like mistakes. There are entire sections that might be scrapped or even reworked. And at some point, this artist needed to learn to trust in their felt sense of their own faith and remind themselves to trust the process. Now, imagine walking into the same studio midway through an exact process we're describing here and deciding that the artist is not talented because the painting is unfinished. Imagine judging this artist's ability based on a moment that was never meant to be final. And yet, this is precisely what we do with ourselves as well as with each other. we encounter people mid-process and treat their single moments as a verdict rather than an encounter. We examine our own behaviors mid-pattern and interpret our actions as evidence of our own fixed identity rather than part of our own unfolding. We forget that nature itself and creation itself requires mess, revision, as well as imperfection. The fear of being judged and the act of judging others causes us to only want to be seen when we are somehow complete or finished. In fact, I can think of a number of stories of artists who have hesitated to show their work before it's complete because of the vulnerability of being seen in process. And this vulnerability is one that's often threaded with the fear that others will not understand what is being created and others will judge it prematurely. There's a fear that others will not hold the vision of the art, of the masterpiece, with the same patience and care that the artist does, and so the process is hidden away. This is similar to when we hide our process and our in-between, when we curate ourselves into something that appears more resolved than we actually feel in any given moment, and when we cannot maintain the illusion of our own completeness, namely, when the mess inevitably surfaces, we turn on ourselves with the same harshness that we have internalized from the world around us. But what if the beauty of the work is not only in the final piece, but in the act of creation itself? What if the brushstrokes, the revisions, the contradictions, the moments of not knowing are in and of themselves beautiful? What if we acknowledge this beauty of becoming in ourselves? It's my sense that if we do this, this will serve us in the mission of our own personal growth journey. If, for example, let's say, make a mistake and interpret this mistake as clear evidence of who I am, then I'll be far less likely to change. Not because I'm choosing not to change or don't genuinely desire to change, but because in this psychological process, I am essentially deciding that change is not available to me. If I continuously remind myself that this mistake, behavior, unfavorable attribute is who I am, I fix my identity, and then it becomes self-reinforcing. But if I can learn to see my behavior as something that's being expressed within a larger process of my own becoming, I create the space to understand that I get to choose who I am, and I get to choose who I become. Remember that what you assume to be true about yourself becomes the lens through which you interpret your reality. If you assume that your mistakes define you, you will continue to find evidence of that assumption. You will notice your missteps more readily than your growth. You will interpret neutral or even positive experiences through a negative lens. You will in subtle ways perpetuate the very identity that you feel constricted by. But if you begin to assume that you are in a process of becoming, that your current expressions are not fixed truths, but instead evolving patterns, you allow yourself to see new possibility. An artist doesn't abandon a painting because it looks messy midway through. They also don't leave it messy because they're afraid of where their artistry may take them. They trust the process, they refine and take steps back and reassess, and from there, they make deliberate choices about what stays and what transforms. There is both acceptance of the current state and a commitment to the vision, and this is the mastery. To look at ourselves in the middle of something and to say, this is not the final version of me, but it is part of the process. To look at others with a lens of kindness and compassion, and to choose not to reduce them into a single moment, even as you hold clarity about what is or what is not acceptable. To be kind does not mean that you need to tolerate harmful behavior, but it also doesn't need to be the subject of our attention, and more specifically, our judgment. And perhaps even more importantly, you can do the same thing for yourself. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes from feeling as though you're not allowed to be in the mess of your own becoming. It creates a pressure to be perfect, to get it right immediately, and to bypass the same process that would lead you to integration and growth. And ironically, this pressure often perpetuates the behavior that you're trying so hard to avoid. Because when you are operating from a hypervigilant place of being afraid of making a mistake, you're far more likely to misstep. The invitation here is to treat yourself as both the artist and the artwork, because you are both. You are the one making choices, and you are the one being shaped by those choices. You are simultaneously the creator and the creation. And when you begin to see yourself this way, you allow yourself to become invested in your own process and not just your final outcome. You begin to care about how you are becoming and not just who you will be. You begin to take pride in the refinement, the process, and in your willingness to stay with something long enough to understand it. You begin to see your humanity not as a flaw to overcome, but as a medium through which something meaningful is being created. So the next time you find yourself judging someone in the midst of their in-between, I want you to remember to pause and consider the artist as well as the art in the making. Remember that what you are seeing is not the final piece. And remember that what may look like a mistake on the surface may be a layer that's necessary for what's to come. Similarly, the next time you find yourself judging yourself, I want you to extend the same understanding inward. When you give yourself the courtesy of seeing your life through this lens, you step out of the urgency to be finished, and you step into the devotion of your own becoming, where every choice is a brush stroke. Every moment is an intentional and present application of your awareness that refines your artistry, not because you're quote unquote getting it right, but because you know that you are the one that's shaping what comes next. Until next time.